said you're probably going to talk about something. Yesterday was November 22nd, obviously the 56th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which I have written a lot about. And before we start, the elephant in the room whenever you talk about Kennedy is you talk about conspiracy theory, all that sort of thing. Conspiracy theory is basically political analysis that the state doesn't like. Okay. And so if you understand that conspiracy theory is just political analysis that the state doesn't like, it sort of takes the sheen off of it. Because I don't really spend a lot of time on the mechanics of what happened. I think it's pretty obvious that the state killed John F. Kennedy. I think most people kind of know that that's what happened, and they just got to put it in the back of their head and they go, yeah, well, there's nothing we can do about it. So, but what I try to do with the Kennedy assassination is contextualize it, because one of the things that makes people understand, I think, what actually happened on that day is when you look at it in the context of everything that was going on before and after the Kennedy assassination in terms of foreign policy. So what were we doing? So at the end of World War II, we decided to create an agency, Central Intelligence Agency, which was instituted in 1947. And does anybody know who wrote the charter for the Central Intelligence Agency? Ian Fleming, the guy who wrote the James Bond novels. Yeah, that guy, that Ian Fleming. Yeah, and he received a special award for special services. Yeah, for writing that thing. He wasn't the only writer, but he was the main writer of the charter. And in a lot of ways, what happened, because of what happened to Great Britain during World War II, they, in a sense, handed off the baton to the United States to be the kind of world power, to run things, as it were, because of course because of the British Navy, going back to the 16th century, Great Britain had spread all over the world and developed into this major colonial power. The United States had not done that except in sort of Latin America before 1947. But after that, the United States becomes the major colonial world power. And we interfered in Greece, and we put in the Dominican Republic, Trujillo, and then got rid of Trujillo because we didn't like him. Go to the Congo, we assisted in getting rid of Patrice Lumumba. And the agencies that are doing those things are essentially covert operators. So the beginning of 47, the other thing that happens, the other major things that happens, is that when Germany is broken out, we get some scientists that come in, some scientists go to Russia. We also get a lot of historians through Douglas MacArthur. A lot of those guys became historians of the Pentagon. And my friend John Judge did a lot of work on this and showed that one of the major historians of the Third Reich, a guy named Otto Wienerker, wrote the official Pentagon history of World War II. So one of Hitler's historians wrote the official history of World War II for the Pentagon, and then later he wrote the Warren Report. So that's what's happening. So some of those Nazis, as we all know, went into NASA, right?
So wait, a Nazi wrote the Warren Report?
Correct.
An ex-Nazi wrote the Warren Report?
Well, there are no ex-Nazis, but yes.
Well, but,
yeah.
That makes my hair fall out.
Well, when you start looking into all this, the rest of your hair is going to fall out. Because everybody knows about Werner von Braun, who was in the SS. He was not a good German. Okay, they didn't just allow anybody in the SS. At Peenemünde, he had slaves that worked for him. Anyway, but there were a lot of other Nazis that came in. One of them has a San Antonio connection. His name was Hubertus Struckholt. And in the 70s, they were going to name a wing of BAMC after him. And then some reporter said, maybe that's not such a great idea, since Struckholt performed experiments.
What's BAMC?
The
Brooke Army Medical
Brooke Army
Center,
Medical
which is
Center.
now SAMC.
Okay.
It's now SAMC, yeah, right. Anyway, so they decided, well, you know what, let's not name it the Hubertus Struckholt. The Nazi wing of BAMC, probably not a good idea. But that happens all the time, because like the Walter Dornberger, there's like, if you start going through NASA in the 60s, the guys that allegedly put us on the moon are Nazis. That's what they are.
They lived in the Houston area, yeah.
A lot of them did, yes. But and then the rest of them went into foreign policy, because The key person in American foreign policy after 1947 is a guy named Reinhard Gehlen. And Allen Dulles, who's the head of CIA, brought him in, and Gehlen had a network of spies inside the Soviet Union for Germany. And so what he said is, look, you guys keep me alive, and I'll put my network to work for you. And that's what happened. And Allen Dulles said something along the lines of, well, we don't have to invite him to the club, because spying is a dirty business. And we knew that our major opponent in the world would be the Soviet Union. In fact, Harry Truman said this famous thing. He said, we should just let Germany and Russia fight it out for a while and kill as many of them as possible. And which happened. I mean, the Soviet Union suffered horrendously. 26 million dead. The numbers are crazy. So when you see the Kennedy assassination in that context, what happens is the foreign policy that we were using on other countries, the covert operations, the black operations we would use to destabilize and to assassinate foreign leaders, goes domestic. That's all that happens. And the same people are involved. The same people are in charge, the same people run it, the same names come up again and again in these documents. And that's what's happening. And all this other stuff is noise, like the mob and all this, all the other alleged theories. They're put out there because they need to get you out of understanding that this assassination is an extension of foreign policy.
But why Kennedy? Why did it come home?
Because Kennedy, oddly enough, it's really complicated. I don't really have time to go into it all, but Kennedy was
breakfast tomorrow morning.
We can order pizza.
Kennedy was he was a mixed figure when he was coming in. They weren't sure because Joe Kennedy had been a guy that would go along with everything, and so had John F. Kennedy to a certain extent. But several years before, he had talked to Charles de Gaulle and to other people in French intelligence, and one of the things that de Gaulle told him was, Algeria is a huge mistake. We should have never done that. Like, there's a terrible. And Kennedy himself made speeches talking about the fact that countries have the right to rule themselves and should not be interfered with. This is years before he became president. So when he was elected, I think there was the internal government wasn't sure whether Kennedy was going to play ball or not. And it became very clear that he was not going to play ball when the Bay of Pigs incident occurred, which is a very complicated incident. Again, I don't have time to go into it here, but Kennedy did not do what they wanted him to do, was to invade Cuba. And when he didn't do that, I think that's one of the major things that signed his death warrant at that point. It's like, we can't work with this guy. And when he gets assassinated, it's clearly a military operation. Generally speaking, the mafia does not have snipers. When you're talking about a military situation, these are ex-military people. And we did this kind of stuff all the time, and we still do. I mean, our foreign policy hasn't really changed that much. We're still trying to control. I mean, everything that's going on in Venezuela for the last 20 years. I mean, we've been interfering there. It continues on. And one thing I do want to mention, this is sort of related, which is that one of the things that happens when you start looking into this stuff again, and this is why people think you're crazy, is because you find out that a lot of major organizations in the world aren't really what you think they are. I was just reading an article this morning, as a matter of fact, a long piece of research about the World Wildlife Fund. Okay, World Wildlife Fund, seemingly innocuous.
The WWF with the
WWF with the pandas, environmental group, was started in 1961 by a guy named Prince Bernard. And as soon as I saw Prince Bernard, I was like, shit, pardon my French. Because this is the guy who started the Bilderberg groups. This is the guy who was involved in IG Farben in 1934. IG Farben was a Nazi organization. Okay, he's a Nazi. The Nazis started the World Wildlife Fund in 1961. And in the 1980s, a document was leaked that showed who was on the board of directors of the World Wildlife Fund. And it was like David Rockefeller and Adnan Khashoggi, who, if you've ever read anything about, go look up Adnan Khashoggi. He's involved in like every major debacle of the 1970s and 80s. But everybody on there, the head of IBM, what do these guys care about wildlife? Like, what does David Rockefeller care about wildlife, right? He doesn't. He cares about power. And what has the World Wildlife been doing? They've been paying paramilitary groups to go into other countries They kicked indigenous populations out of their lands in Nepal. So, but they do it under the cover of being the World Wildlife Fund, because it's completely innocuous, right? And don't get me started on the Red Cross. I never give money to the Red Cross. Anything that has a red, it's like, remember, I don't know, you may remember the cartoon He-Man. He-Man cartoon. He has a red cross on his chest. He's blonde. He's blue-eyed. Who's his enemy? Beastman. So whose perspective is that from, right? This is colonialism in a cartoon. And you find out that almost everything is like this when you look into the world. And it either, you get a sense of humor about it after a while, like I do. I say, oh shit, Prince Bernard again. Because otherwise you'd go crazy, because the world is it's just a mess. But there's a sense in which it does make sense, because even our own world, like in the United States right now, we have people who live in trailer homes who are vociferously defending the right of Jeff Bezos to own half the world. So how did that happen? That happened through propaganda, okay? And it happened for a long time. And when you start going to the bottom of this stuff, you find, oh my God, but again, it's a long story, and I'd be here all day, and you'd all be depressed when I was done. So.
That's why I write fiction.